Now we're taking the oil lines off of the turbo. We got the top one right here. It's a banjo fitting. It's a 17 millimeter. Should crack loose fairly easy. As you take this off, be careful. You got 2 copper washers. Copper washer number 1, copper washer number 2. Next is the oil drain line, which I'll need to go to the cab to do. Right here, actually. Okay, so now that we got the oil lines off, it's time to unbolt the turbo. There is some 10 millimeter bolts. They also are a Torx 40. I'm gonna try and get them off the Torx 40 in an impact gun. And it's good practice to always take out the hardest bolts first, because the last bolts generally are the hardest to get out, fumbling with the turbo. Okay, so we got all the bolts out, and now the turbo is ready to come on out. Okay, so next we're going to be replacing the OEM oil line with this 16-inch stainless braided line that we provide. Has a banjo fitting on one end. We will loosen up down here where the oil pressure sensor is, which is where the OEM turbo pulls its oil from. We'll just loosen this guy up.
Go ahead.
Okay, next we're going to be pulling off this oil pressure sensor, which is where the oil feed line gets its oil pressure from. You're going to want to be careful because this is a banjo line fitting and there is 2 copper washers that we will need to reuse.
Yep.
So we have our oil pressure sensor right here. We got 1 copper gasket right there. We'll put the banjo fitting on so it presses up against the copper washer. Put the other copper washer on that can seal it up against the case, and we'll thread it back into the same hole it came out of.
Go ahead.
Okay, as I'm snugging this up, you're going to want to point this banjo fitting with the 4AN fitting pointing straight up, and then tighten this down while holding it in place. This does not take a crazy amount of pressure. As you can see, I'm just going to use just a little force, a couple fingers is all, to seal it up. We do not want to break that off in the case. And make sure you plug her back in. Okay, as we have this tightened down, I want to show you a little trick. So the oil line is going to come straight up, loop around, and go to the top of the turbo. So you want to get this oil line as set up as you can so it goes on there. You can have it all twisted up and it won't do what it needs to do. So trying to line it properly right here first, so that way we need to put it on the turbo, it's nice and easy. Okay, as we get ready to put the new turbo on, we're going to get the studs ready for the header. You'll have a bag of 9 40 millimeter long M8 studs that you'll put into the head.
Just thread these in finger tight.
All right guys, at this point it's time to put the turbo on. This is going to be a good breaking point for you to run down to the gas station and pick up a 12-pack because it's the bitches part of the job. You're going to want to make sure you put on the gasket that's going to be provided with the turbo. And I don't necessarily need to be back there by the turbo to explain the tips on how to get it on as easy as possible. We've already mounted it all. Basically, you'll have your studs coming through as you saw in the previous segment. You'll have just enough thread showing right here to where you can get the nuts on. You're gonna wanna slowly get each one of these bottom nuts on by like 1 or 2 threads, and then slowly inch it onto the head and get more bite on the threads until you can fully seat it. That's gonna be the only way to get this on successfully and hassle-free. Okay, so we're gonna do a little trick right here to help you get the oil line on easier. So we provide you with a 45-degree 10 AN oil drain line fitting. It's gonna be easiest to put this on the bench. So pretty much just thread it on. Get it snug. And basically a good rule of thumb on how to position this is look at where the 4 bolts are. Find this bottom corner one and angle this out parallel with it. And then once you put the turbo on, the oil line will just slip right over there effortlessly. All right guys, we're gonna get the downpipe support bracket off so we can make room for our new exhaust we're gonna be putting on there. To get this off, we have 2 options. First option is take a cutoff wheel and just cut that guy off. That would be my suggestion if it was my machine. Since this isn't my machine, I'm gonna take it off so we can show you how to do it. We'll pull this cover off with just 2 bolts right there. And then next we gotta go through and cut all these zip ties so we can get this back piece out. Now that we got all the zip ties cut, we got to come over here to the front side, and we got 2 10mm bolts we have to undo. All right, so now that we have the inner cover off, we have to unbolt the downpipe bracket. It's going to be 2 13mm bolts that are located in here. Got one right there. And the other one up there. Okay, so now that we have the bracket off, the bracket had mounting hardware that secured this plastic cover for the hoses to it. You'll no longer be able to attach this to that, but if you get in there and zip tie all the hoses back to the backing piece and just put this piece back on, it's gonna hold it nice and tight and keep everything protected still. Okay, so now that we got the exhaust all put on, I want to touch bases on how we route this boost control solenoid. Here's one that I'm going to show you just for easy reference. It'll be mounted just like this, up underneath with the connector facing the back of the vehicle. The barb coming straight down on a 90-degree angle, that will go into the wastegate on the turbo. The one that comes off of the metal fitting above the connector, that will go to the boost source. The boost source is going to be on the snell of the turbo where there is a barb already. The one on the back that comes off opposite of the connector, that doesn't go to anything. That is vented to atmosphere, and all you need to do is put a little bit of hose on there to keep dirt out of there and leave it as is. Okay, so now that we have everything hooked up, we got the car strapped down to the dyno to make its first test hits. We've already put the intercooler back on. Basically, to put this car back together, you're going to reverse the steps that you did to take it apart. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you have the big full turbo kit that has our plenum, stay tuned. We're going to have a brief video on how to plumb the vacuum lines and route the map sensors. Thank you for watching.
All right, today we are quickly going to go over plumbing the vacuum lines on a Packard Performance Big Turbo Kit. We're going to start off at the plenum, follow that down. That's going to come to the blow-off valve, whether your turbo has an internal blow-off valve or an external blow-off valve, you'll route that line the same. The other two lines, as you can see, are plugged off. You're welcome to leave this on that we supply you with, or you can just cap them however you'd like. Then we're going to go over here to the turbo, start at the wastegate, follow that line down to the boost control solenoid here. As you can see, it is the only barb that runs perpendicular to the other two. It's on the top side by the actual plug of the boost control solenoid. Then we're going to come back to the compressor housing, and the barb that comes off of the snail is going to feed into a T, as you can see here, that we supply you with in your kit. If you keep following that line all the way through, it's going to lead you back to the boost control solenoid. The best way to identify which barb the compressor side line goes to is it's the only metal barb on the boost control solenoid. We're going to go back to the T here, follow the perpendicular barb that comes off to this map sensor. If we follow this all the way through and go back to the boost control solenoid, the right side or opposing to the metal barb side of the boost control solenoid, that's just going to vent to atmosphere. You don't need to do anything with it, just let it breathe. And to touch on the sensors a little bit more, this OEM sensor here is obviously going to go with this billet connector, and then this map sensor here is going to plug into the plenum. The difference between the two is they'll both fit in the plenum, but the difference between the two is the sensor that goes into the plenum is going to kick off to the left side, whereas this sensor does not. So you need one sensor before the throttle body, which is this guy, and then you need this sensor that is after the throttle body. There you go.